It's April 1972. At a Romanian hospital far from his lush green and beautiful homeland in Ghana, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah is seeking treatment for prostate cancer. Since his overthrow by the military in February 1966, the former Ghanaian leader had practically disappeared from the political scene. Even with their best efforts, the Romanian doctors believe that Nkrumah has only a few days to live as a result of the cancer. On the 27th of April 1972, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah passed away in Bucharest. He was lonely and far from his people. There was no ceremony or drama for someone surrounded by both throughout his political career as president of Ghana and as one of Africa's most acclaimed figures. A man with a price on his head, who was forbidden to return to the country he led to independence in 1957 and ruled for nearly 13 years. In his will, he said, "I, Kwame Nkrumah of Africa, cause my body to be embalmed and preserved, like Lenin. If this was not possible, it should be cremated and the ashes scattered throughout the African continent in rivers, streams, deserts, and savannas." In the end, the events surrounding his death were insignificant in comparison to his life. However, they did lead to one of the least known stories about Nkrumah. This story focuses on the battle over Nkrumah's body. It's February the 24th, 1966. Dr. Kwame Nkrumah is on a diplomatic mission to China and a peacemaking mission to North Vietnam. As his presidential jet, DH-125, touches down in China, back home, a CIA-sponsored coup is underway, leading to the overthrow of the government by military officers led by Lieutenant General Joseph Arthur Ankara, Colonel Kotoka, and Major Afrifa. The junta names itself the National Liberation Council and ruled as a military government for 3 years. In China, Nkrumah learns about the takeover from Chinese officials. He stays in Beijing for 4 days, where Prime Minister Zhou Enlai treats him with courtesy. Later, Nkrumah leaves China for Guinea, where he is appointed co-president by the country's president, Ahmed Sekou Toure. Although the position was largely symbolic, it nevertheless had symbolic significance. You see, the complicity of the West in Nkrumah's overthrow was widely suspected in Africa. As a result, most African leaders kept their distance from Nkrumah, fearing that associating with him would bring the Western wrath upon themselves as well. By affiliating Nkrumah to himself, Toure sent the message that the ideals that Nkrumah upheld made it worth the risk to support him. Following his overthrow, the Ghanaian junta also struggled to stabilize the country. In January 1972, Ghana's military junta, led by Colonel Acheampong, overthrew the Prime Minister Kofi Busia while on a trip to Britain for medical treatment. Nkrumah's declining health caused his hopes of returning to Ghana as president to wane. He flew to Romania for treatment in August 1971 and died there on the 27th of April 1972 at the age of 62. In response to the question of where to repatriate Nkrumah's body, the easy answer would have been to Ghana, right? Well, the body was flown back to Guinea, accompanied by Nkrumah's friend Kojo Bosio. There, President Sekou Toure proclaimed 3 days of national mourning and set the 16th of March 1972 as the day of the funeral. The action of repatriation marked the beginning of the battle over Nkrumah's remains. If the Romanians had sent the body to Ghana, maybe none of this would have happened. On the 29th of April 1972, Nkrumah's body arrived from Bucharest with hundreds of thousands of people lining the route from the airport to Conakry's center, with the coffin draped with the Ghanaian flag and not the Ghanaian one. It took the procession 2.5 hours to reach the People's Palace, where President Toure waited, surrounded by members of the National Political Bureau and other high Ghanaian officials. The following day, Nkrumah's wife, Madame Fatia Nkrumah, arrived from Cairo with their 3 children. At the airport, she was greeted by Sekou Toure's wife and a number of officials before being driven to the presidential palace where Sekou Toure received her. After visiting the People's Palace where her husband's body lay in state, Ms. Nkrumah retired to the president's summer residence. On the same day, delegations flew in from many African countries, with Radio Conakry announcing that Fidel Castro, the Cuban prime minister, would arrive and called on all party members to greet him enthusiastically as the leader of the Cuban Revolution and as one of the greatest warriors of the progressive world. During the address at the People's Palace, Toure spoke for 1 hour and a half discussing Nkrumah's life from childhood through his last days in Guinea. He discussed Nkrumah's studies in the United States, his role in the early Pan-African movements in London, and his rise to power in Ghana, which culminated in Ghana's independence from Great Britain in 1957. Toure concluded with the words, "Nkrumah is not Ghanaian. He is an African. Nkrumah will never die." After the ceremony, Nkrumah's body was taken to the stadium where thousands of Ghanaians filed past the coffin in mournful silence. The heads of delegations, which had come from 40 countries, offered their condolences to Fatia Nkrumah and her children. Late in the day, a 5-member delegation from Ghana, headed by Colonel Benny, a member of the National Redemption Council, arrived in Conakry to attempt to persuade Toure to release Nkrumah's body. In Ghana, Nkrumah's aged mother, Elizabeth Nyanimba, also made an impassioned plea to President Toure to allow the body to be returned to Ghana, saying, "I want to touch the body of my son before he is buried, or I die." She also indicated that she would like her son's body to be embalmed and kept permanently on public display the way Lenin's body is preserved. As for Colonel Achempong, he desired that Nkrumah's body be returned to Ghana, where he guaranteed that the former president would be given a dignified burial. Toure, on the other hand, was not buying into any of this, since this wasn't sufficient reason enough to consent. Therefore, he made sure that everything he agreed was on his terms. He had a strong negotiating position as the Romanians had sent the body to Conakry anyway. Toure insisted that Nkrumah's tomb be placed in front of Ghana's parliamentary building. He also demanded the release of all Nkrumah's supporters detained in Ghana and the removal of the ban on the return of his exiled supporters. He also said that all men who had occupied ministerial appointments and high positions in his civil service be restored to their former posts. In other words, Toure wanted to reimpose Nkrumah's deposed government, except for Nkrumah, on the Ghanaian people as a price for recovering the former president's body. If these terms are not met, Toure implied that the body would be kept in Guinea. Colonel Achempong, who had just assumed the position of leadership of the country, refused to negotiate on those terms and continued to demand the return of the body. It was reported that Ghana police even offered a reward of $120,000 to anyone who brought Nkrumah back to Ghana, dead or alive. The National Redemption Council, however, claimed that the reward was posted before they took over the country and added that it had been revoked in the spirit of the January 13th revolution. Toure never acceded to the demands of Nkrumah's family, Ghanaians, government officials, or even the media. Seeing no moral justification for Guinea's leaders' decision to keep Nkrumah's body, African leaders stepped in and began criticizing Toure's inflexibility with increasing harshness. When President William Tolbert of Liberia, Shiaka Stevens of Sierra Leone, and General Yakubu Gowon of Nigeria tried to persuade Toure that it was in the best interest of Africa's dignity and Africa's image abroad that the body is returned to Ghana, even so, he still refused, determined to squeeze every possible ounce of advantage from Nkrumah's demise. Eventually, after too much pressure from several African leaders and the press, he released the body. On the 7th of July 1972, the embalmed body of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was finally flown from Ghana in a special Ghanaian Air Force plane after months of negotiations. All flags were ordered to fly at half-mast until the country's first leader was buried. In Accra, thousands of Ghanaians paid their last respects the following day at the State House as Nkrumah's body lay in state. In his own country, Nkrumah's death evoked mixed feelings of grief, remorse, or indifference, depending on whether one's sentiments lay with or against the ex-president. Colonel Acheampong and the National Redemption Council wisely allowed Nkrumah's partisans to express their sorrow without any interference from the government. Even more, the military junta associated itself fully with the public display of regret. May 19th was declared a national day of mourning and a public holiday, and a non-denominational service was held in an open area around the State House in Accra. The ceremony was attended by a number of members from the National Redemption Council, although significantly, Colonel Acheampong himself was not among them. It was also attended by diplomatic corps and a few traditional chiefs. In addition, there were several thousand persons from all walks of life, from barefoot peasants and market women to persons who had held high office under Nkrumah. Many wore the traditional mourning cloth and wept openly as they walked past the coffin, which, draped in the kente cloth, stood symbolically where Nkrumah's coffin would have been. His body was finally flown to his home village in Nkroful, where he was buried in a vault. After 20 years of his death, Nkrumah's body was again exhumed on the 1st of July 1992. He was reburied at a mausoleum in Accra, built on the same grounds where he declared Ghana's liberation on the 6th of March 1957. In 2022, the Conventional People's Party announced that they would organize a fresh, befitting burial ceremony for the late president in November 2022. They said he had not been given a befitting burial and a funeral service, the kind of treatment that should have been accorded a head of state.